Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Susan Ilian. Russian shelling has left 7 people hurt in the Kherson region of southern Ukraine, according to the head of the regional military administration. The strikes hit a series of communities along the Dnipro River near the city of Borislav. While authorities in Russia-controlled areas of eastern Ukraine said a total of 7 civilians have been killed in 2 separate Ukrainian artillery strikes. 4 civilians died in Donetsk when shells hit a car park, and another 6 people were injured. Authorities say another 3 people died in blasts at a bus stop in Lysychansk, some 120 kilometers to the northeast of Donetsk. Donetsk, capital of the Ukrainian province of the same name, has been controlled by Russian proxy forces since 2014, but remains close to the front line of Russia's war with Ukraine and regularly comes under fire from Ukrainian forces. Meanwhile, Ukrainian soldiers trained on an armored personnel carrier and shot at targets on a shooting range near Bakhmut. The commander of the 5th Separate Assault Brigade, 41-year-old Ivan, said he trained soldiers before they went to the front line. He says the task on the training ground is to prepare the soldiers step by step to do the fine-tuning. Ukrainian and Russian forces battled in the streets of Bakhmut, eastern Ukraine's devastated fortress city, where Ukrainian soldiers said they were ready to launch their long-anticipated counteroffensive once the weather improves. The months-long battle for Bakhmut, one of the last urban centers in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk province yet to fall to Moscow, has proven one of the bloodiest of Russia's invasion, now in its 14th month. Greece says it would support Ukraine's military as long as it takes, as the country's 2 defense ministers met in Athens. Greece has joined its European counterparts in providing military and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine since the start of the conflict, condemning Russia's actions. Some 20,000 displaced Ukrainians are currently in Greece. Greek Defense Minister Nikos Panagiotis said 3,870 tons of military assistance has been sent to Ukraine, including Stinger missiles, ammunition, vehicles, and rockets. He said the country would continue to provide more military equipment in the future. While Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov said his country was eager to draw military knowledge from Greece's naval forces in the future, including in sectors such as demining.
Looking forward of discussing further ways to strengthen our defense ties and provide every possible support to Ukraine at this very important and crucial stage of the war. We will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. That's our very clear position.
Your country absolutely clear understand what it means to have the threats from the neighbors, and I know that you support us because you know what it means, all these kind of threats. And I'm going to discuss with you not only the current situation in the battlefield, our plans, and I also would like to discuss strategic issues. Because after this war, after the victory of Ukraine in this war, together with our partners, we will continue to develop our defense capabilities.
We discuss possible ways of establishing peace and restoring security in Europe, including the mechanism on further strengthening sanctions against the aggressor, and particularly in defense industry also as well.
We both expressed our strong will to work together in order to enhance our bilateral defense cooperation. I also reaffirmed our firm and principled position to support Ukraine and the Ukrainian armed forces in their inherent right to defend their homeland and restore the sovereignty as well as the territorial integrity of their country.
Chinese President Xi Jinping says China will join hands with France in urging the international community to work for a political settlement of the Ukraine crisis. On the Ukraine crisis, Xi said China advocates peace talks and a political solution to it. He adds that the international community should work together to cope with spillovers from the Ukraine crisis in such fields as food, energy, finance, and transportation, and to reduce negative impacts of the crisis on the world, especially the developing countries.
关于乌克兰危机
China advocates peace talks and a political solution to the Ukraine crisis. China is willing to work with France to call on the international community to stay rational and exercise restraint, refrain from taking actions that may make the situation become worse or even run out of control. Members of the international community should strictly abide by the international humanitarian law, avoid attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure, and protect women, children, and other victims of the conflict. It's imperative for the parties concerned to honor their commitment that nuclear weapons must not be used and that nuclear wars must not be fought. Oppose the use of biochemical weapons under any circumstance, and oppose armed attacks against nuclear power plants or other peaceful nuclear facilities. Peaceful talks should be resumed as soon as possible. The international community should work for a political settlement that accommodates all parties' legitimate security concerns in accordance with the purposes and principles of this UN Charter and build a balanced, effective, and sustainable security architecture in Europe. The international community should work together to cope with spillovers from the Ukraine crisis in such fields as food, energy, finance, and transportation, and reduce negative impacts of the crisis on the world, especially developing countries.
Meanwhile, European Commission President von der Leyen says Chinese President Xi Jinping expressed willingness to speak to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky after French President Emmanuel Macron urged Beijing to talk sense to Russia over the war in Ukraine. Xi, who has sought to position China as a potential mediator in the conflict, but is seen by the West as favoring Russia, responded by saying he hoped Moscow and Kiev could hold peace negotiations as soon as possible.
We discussed and I raised the topic, I encouraged President Xi to reach out to President Zelensky. I know from my phone calls that and President Zelensky asked for it publicly. So it was interesting to hear that President Xi reiterated his willingness to speak when conditions and time are right. I think this is a positive element. We also count on China not to provide any military equipment directly or indirectly to Russia, because we all know arming the aggressor would be against international law and it would significantly harm our relationship. We all agree that stability in the Taiwan Strait is of paramount importance. We have a very clear interest in preserving this stability, the peace, and the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, and therefore nobody should unilaterally change the status quo by force in this region. The threat to, or the use of force to change the status quo is unacceptable, and it is important that the tensions that might occur should be resolved through dialogue.
Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu visited arms and armored vehicles factories in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod region. According to the Defense Ministry, Shoigu inspected a facility that produces artillery and aviation ammunition for use in what Russia calls its special military operation in Ukraine. The minister also reportedly visited Arzamas machine building plant, where he inspected assembly lines and workshops for the production of armored personnel carriers of various modifications and armored vehicles Tiger. Now, during the trip, Shoigu was reportedly told that the new double armor of advanced models could withstand a blast from 2 kilograms of TNT, as well as providing protection from a wide array of projectiles. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met with Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu in the Turkish capital, Ankara, today for talks that includes the war in Ukraine and trade, including the Black Sea Grain Deal. Now, both parties agreed that obstacles must be lifted to ensure freer Russian fertilizer and grain exports, and enabled an unbrokered deal ensuring Black Sea shipments of Ukrainian grain to be extended beyond next month. The deal, agreed last July, ensures safe passage of grains and other commodities from Ukrainian ports despite a Russian naval blockade. Last month, Russia said it would extend it for another 60 days, even though the United Nations, Ukraine, and Turkey had pushed for a repeat 120-day rollover. The White House said Russia's refusal to give consular access to detained Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich is inexcusable. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said the United States needs to get consular access to Evan.
We still haven't been able to get consular access, and that's an issue that we continually bring up through our embassy in Moscow with the Russians. I wish I had a good answer for that, because it's inexcusable. We need to get consular access to Evan. I won't get ahead of where we are, and I think you can understand why we would certainly want to talk about potential negotiations here from the podium. We're at a very early stage here. Main goal is to get consular access to him so we can have that contact and that connectivity. We're doing what we can to keep his employer and the family informed. Our focus is squarely on that right now.
Denis Krivenka was among Ukrainian soldiers retreating from the eastern city of Bakhmut in October when Russian shells hit. The 24-year-old woke up in hospital with a missing arm and both legs. Glad to be alive, but unsure if he would ever walk again. Months later, in the German town of Duderstadt, Krivenko made his first steps again with an artificial leg made by Ottobock, a company founded in 1919 to help wounded World War I veterans. Ottobock specialists are using cases like his to train Ukrainian technicians on constructing limbs and using their products for victims of the war that have left thousands with fractures, amputations, and spinal cord injuries. Ukrainian artistic swimmers Marina and Vladislava have spent years training for Paris 2024, but their Olympic dreams hang in the balance after the government decided to block its athletes from competing in qualifiers if they include Russians. The International Olympic Committee has recommended Russians and Belarusians be allowed to return to international competition as neutrals since their ban after last year's invasion of Ukraine, which Moscow calls a special military operation. The IOC will make a separate decision on their participation at next year's Games, which Ukraine has threatened to boycott if they are allowed to compete there. Despite the possibility of missing out on Paris, the twins have stuck to their rigorous training in Kiev and spend hours a day preparing for World Cup events in France and Egypt in May.